Hello, everyone, and welcome to the AIHM Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine Wellness webinar. We are thrilled today to be celebrating Earth Day. It's actually the 52nd year of Earth Day, and we are just delighted to have our guest speaker here today, Dr. Amy Sapola, who is a fellow and alumni from our program and just such a phenomenal presenter. And she's going to be talking on the importance of soil in a food as medicine approach. But before we get to her presentation, for those of you who are joining us for the very first time, the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine is a global interprofessional integrative health association working to transform healthcare, body, mind, spirit, community, and planet. We're very dedicated to our planet Earth and to living on her in a healthy way and taking care of her. So, and over the years, we brought together a variety of organizations, the American Holistic Medical Association, the American Board of Integrative Holistic Medicine, and most recently, the Academic Collaborative of Integrative Health. We're really excited about the collective work we're all doing, and we're excited about this webinar today. And remember, if you go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/AIHM Global, and subscribe to our channel, all of our webinars get published there, and you can go back and share them with colleagues, rewatch them. It's a wonderful library and resource for everyone. I also want to encourage any of you who are interested in taking our fellowship program. We have an integrative health and medicine online educational program that is 1,000 hours of evidence-based curriculum for licensed clinicians. And we offer a flash sale for those of you who for the first time are learning and are interested in possibly applying. You can receive up to $2,000 off tuition. And $100 off the application fee if you let people know that you attended Amy's webinar. And we are accepting new fellows for our October 2022 class, which will be cohort 13. So if you're interested, reach out to us at fellowship@aihm.org and just be sure that you mention the code. So I am so thrilled to have with us our special guest today. Dr. Amy Sapola is a PharmD, has trained here with the Academy and also with IFM. She is a graduate from our program, and she's the director of Farmacy at the Chef's Garden. She's a certified wellness coach through the Institute for Functional Medicine certified practitioner and a doctor of pharmacy with a BS in nutrition. And she's really passionate about helping people achieve radiant health through reconnecting with their own intuition, with nature, and with deep nourishment. So it is really my pleasure to pass over the Zoom floor to you, Amy, and welcome back.
Thank you so much, Tabby. It's a pleasure to be here, and I honestly can't recommend the fellowship strongly enough. It's been transformational for me, and I just love the work that AIHM is doing. So thank you for having me here, especially on all days of Earth Day. I just feel so grateful to be here and be presenting to all of you. So let's get started. So I have really no disclosures other than that I am an employee of the Chef's Garden, and we do sell vegetables. So I might be a little biased towards vegetables, but I have no other relevant financial disclosures. Today, just the outline of what I'm going to cover, basically what's pharmacy and food as medicine, how is regenerative agriculture unique, why is soil health important to human health, and then also, aren't all vegetables nutritious, right? And so we'll talk through that and how to optimize nutrient density and absorption. When I first started at the Chef's Garden, one of the things I realized pretty quickly was there was really no established definition for what pharmacy with an F is. So I came up with this definition based on the definition of pharmacy with a P. And really fundamentally, what I think it's about is pharmacy is the application of food as medicine. So pharmacy is going upstream to address the root cause. And that's really fundamental to functional medicine. It's prevention through nourishment, and that leads to healthcare cost avoidance, right? It's also looking at the impact of how food's grown, the nutrient density, and the eating experience, bringing in those mindful eating and digestion elements, which I won't really get to today, but I just want to make sure to put it out there that I think that is extremely important. It's also about improving health today and health for future generations. We, the farmers, want to be part of the healthcare team, and I think that is really fundamental to change. So most of you have probably seen this before. It's really popular in the functional medicine realm, but essentially I think in healthcare, a lot of the time we're spending right now is very quickly trying to mop up the floor or treat the symptoms without turning off the faucet. So health, as we all know, is not just the absence of disease. It's really taking into account physical, mental, and social well-being. There are over 45,000 search results that come up on PubMed for the health benefits of vegetables. So I think it's pretty well established that people know vegetables are pretty good for them. The Mediterranean diet or lifestyle is the most well studied. It's very plant forward. So they recommend 4 or more cups of vegetables daily. And it's interesting because the USDA recommendations are only 2.5 cups of vegetables a day. And currently only 1 in 10 Americans are actually meeting that recommendation. So what is important to think about too is when you look at therapeutic lifestyle plans or diet plans, especially when it comes to multiple sclerosis or reversing cognitive decline, some of the more popular plans in functional medicine are recommending 6 to 9 cups of vegetables a day. So really a big difference there. So we know there's so many different proven health benefits from eating vegetables. These are just some of them, but I mean, I think it's very well established that there are a lot of health benefits. So what I want to get into next is what's the difference and why is it important, the different farming practices, and how does that really influence the health of the vegetables or the plants that you're growing? Whoops. So first of all, conventional agriculture really has a focus on efficiency. So it's about how do you grow the most amount of crops possible in kind of the smallest amount of space. Usually this requires a lot of inputs. That's energy, that's synthetic chemicals, fertilizers, pesticides, all of the things, using potentially GMO crops, heavy irrigation, intensive tillage. So really taking from the soil, but not giving back much, if anything. Some concerns with that. So environmental concerns, of course. So how is that affecting water pollution? How is it affecting the decline in productivity from the soil? A lot of places there's water scarcity, and a lot of water is being pulled from the groundwater in order to be used for irrigation. There's resistance to the herbicides, the pesticides. Those things are developing the more they're used. And then, of course, climate change. There's also economic and social concerns. So the large federal expenditures going to crop insurance, loss of small family farms, and then the impact on human health, of course, being the potential health hazards of antibiotics in animal production, pesticide and nitrate contamination in food and water, and then, of course, the farmer's health as well. And what we've seen is increased rates of Hodgkin's disease, multiple myeloma, leukemia, melanoma, and cancers of the lips, stomach, and prostate in farmers. So in conventional agriculture, soil erosion is occurring at a rate of 10 to 100 times higher than soil formation. So this is just simply not sustainable. In a somewhat controversial statement, the UN said that if we continue to degrade the soil at this rate that we are now, we'd run out of topsoil in about 60 years. This graph shows there is variation to how quickly we're running out of topsoil based on farming techniques. and location, but really the take-home message is this is not an infinite resource, and without concerted effort, we're heading in the wrong direction. So that's where regenerative agriculture comes into play. This is really about farming in harmony with nature. So promoting biodiversity through growing different crops. Just at the Chef's Garden, we grow like 600 different crops. Most of what you see when you drive down the road is monoculture, right? And so that doesn't necessarily support pollinators, where when you have that diversity in plants, it's a food source for pollinators, insects, birds, all of those things. And by having that diversity in food crop, you also have more food security, because if you have a disease in one crop, it doesn't wipe out everything. The soil health is also extraordinarily important. So in regenerative farming, we're using cover crops, and cover crops help to put nutrients back in the soil. So there are crops that we're putting in. Usually it's a mix of different crops. We usually like to see like 8 to 10 crops, or maybe even 12, that you leave for the season. So you're not continually taking from the land. And then you can cut those to make green mulch, which can help suppress weeds. It also helps prevent erosion. Instead of leaving bare soil, to have crops there with roots helps prevent erosion as well as runoff, because again, more moisture is absorbed when there are plants in the ground. It also helps prevent soil compaction. So healthy soil is also influenced by crop rotation. So if you're always growing the same thing in the same place, it's always taking the same nutrients out of the soil. So by rotating crops around, you can actually be putting nutrients back into the soil. That's also a natural way to control pests. So if you're growing, say, like a brassica vegetable in one spot, you wouldn't put a brassica vegetable in the same spot each year, because even if it's a different one within that family, the same pests are attracted to it. Again, crop rotation also increases that biodiversity, and you can use intercropping where you're planting different crops next to each other. And these have different synergies, and they have different functions as far as their soil microbes that help to enhance the soil and increase diversity. And we'll talk more about that too. And then of course, regenerative agriculture is about reducing the use of synthetic chemical inputs. And really it's about reducing the need for synthetic chemical inputs. Because what we know is that if you're growing healthy plants, they aren't going to need the same synthetic inputs as a plant that does not have the nutrients it needs. So this is just an example of kind of a monoculture situation versus like a cover crop situation. So when it comes to soil health and human health, I really appreciate the work of William Albright. He's a soil scientist that in 1966 observed that the health of the soil affects the nutrient balance between proteins and carbohydrates, both in feed and food crops. And only healthy organic soils with a proper balance of macronutrients and micronutrients provide the complete proteins necessary for good human health. He distinguished between grow foods, which were foods grown on healthy soil, and go foods, which were filled with carbohydrates for energy, but lacking in complete proteins needed for health and growth. And this is more complex than I'll explain like the whole pyramid today, but essentially what this is showing is level one, that basic bottom level, is where the majority of food crops are hanging out that are grown in the US today. This is that they're completing photosynthesis and they're producing carbohydrates. As plants move up the pyramid, they gain health. So their health improves as they're moving up to level 2, level 3, and level 4. Level 3 and level 4 is what you're really shooting for. That's where the plants are making complete proteins, they're making lipids, and they're really protecting themselves from insect and pest pressure. When they have increased lipid synthesis, you'll actually see that the leaves are shiny and waxy, and they look really healthy. So why is soil health important to human health, right? 78% of the calories that we consume are from plants grown in soil. And 20% of the calories that we eat from animals, if you eat animals, comes from plants grown in soil that the animals eat, right? So soil is also a natural filter to remove contaminants from water, and this can be good or bad. If you have a lot of heavy metals in the soil, those can be taken up in the plants, sometimes as a form of soil remediation. Healthy soil contains almost all of the elements needed for human health as well. Here's a good example. On the left is what we would call dirt. On the right is what we would call soil. You can definitely see the color difference, but one of the most important things to notice is really that soil is alive and dirt does not have that life to it. It isn't as rich, and it just doesn't support plants in the same way. So this is a cute drawing from the USDA where the worms are picketing on their dirt. And then on the left, you'll see the biodiversity in the soil and all the different kind of interconnections and connectiveness that's going on in that ecosystem. So oops, I think I said, there we go. So the phytobiome is actually like the plants, their environment, and their associated micro and macroorganisms. So you'll see that it's kind of more complex than what it seems on the surface, right? When you just look at a plant outside, you don't necessarily realize everything that's going on under the soil. This actually shows a little bit of a zoomed in picture that there's multiple kind of microbiomes going on. So there's the rhizosphere microbiome, which is like the root microbiome, but there's also the soil microbiome. And what we know is that higher diversity can increase the number and resilience of plant beneficial functions and increase the expression of plant beneficial traits that are hard to obtain from a species that's just grown in isolation. This like symbiosis that's going on around the roots can actually increase the nutritional quality of food crops, including increasing the vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants that are beneficial to human health found in those plants. So I think this is pretty incredible when you consider that 1 teaspoon of healthy soil contains 10,000 to 50,000 microbe species. And then 1 teaspoon also contains more living organisms than there are people in the world. So pretty incredible when you start thinking about what is simply contained in healthy soil. This one makes me laugh, but I think it's a really good example. So this is called the Soil Your Undies test. And this is after 5 weeks. So cotton underwear are primarily cellulose, and cellulose is broken down by bacteria. So a really good way to test if your soil is alive and well is to bury some cotton underwear, leave the waistbands sticking out so you know where they are, and after about 5 weeks to unbury it and see how it looks. You can see these ones are starting to get eaten up, and that's how it should look. It should look like kind of a wet newspaper, right? Like shredding and tearing apart. If the underwear are still intact, the microbial diversity isn't there. They're not eating your undies. So I think this is a great way just to test how alive soil is. So we talk a lot about, oops, all right. So what we like to say is healthy soil grows healthy plants, which make healthy people. And I think this is really fundamental, especially today on Earth Day. I think when we look at like a functional medicine approach to health and wellness and how soil plays a role, soil is fundamental to human health. So the microbiome is amazing, right? The human microbiome, there's actually more bacteria in your gut alone than all the cells in your entire body. This bacterial universe basically contains species that combined have up to 150 more genes than exist in our human genome. So when it comes to soil and the microbiome, the human gut microbiome diversity is 10% that of soil biodiversity, which is pretty amazing. And it's decreased some because of the modern lifestyle. Human loss of beneficial organisms has been associated with reduced contact of soil and feces from animals and all the things out there. And then all of the hygienic measures, antibiotics, a low fiber diet, and more processed foods. But there is a close linkage between the soil microbiome and the human intestinal microbiome. So loss of the soil biodiversity actually is occurring as well. And that's mostly because of agrochemicals, low plant biodiversity, and soil management practices like we talked about. There's also a concurrent increase in diseases related to the human intestinal microbiome, as many of us have probably seen in practice. I think it's really important to notice this first point here, which is that the dietary intake has a stronger influence on gut microbial composition than host genetics. And that's something that often we say so much that the genetics is really the most powerful thing. And in this case, it's not. It's really the dietary intake. And your GI microbiome can actually influence your genes, which is incredible. When it comes to energy expenditure, this kind of relates to cravings too, especially when you intake more energy-rich processed foods that are higher in sugar and fat. It decreases the biodiversity of the microbiome, and that results in microbes in the gastrointestinal tract that are under a selective pressure to affect the host eating behavior. So they generate cravings for more of those foods that kind of suppress their microbial competitors. So a diet rich in plant-derived carbohydrates and fibers is actually a stronger predictor for gut microbial diversity patterns than people who, or actually than even antibiotic exposure. So another study that they did was looking at kind of where people lived and how that influenced their microbiome. So there was no similarity in adulthood among people like relatives not sharing a household. Genetically unrelated individuals who were sharing a household, though, showed significant similarity. And genetics do play a minor role in shaping the gut microbial community, but they found it was below 8%. So again, the lowest bacterial diversity in urban areas, and that's where about 83% of the population lives, is really because of lower contact with soil and less plant and fiber materials, maybe more processed foods. Organic vegetables do show higher biodiversity of microbes than those conventionally grown. And there is some concern, certainly with the GMO crops and how that affects the rhizosphere and soil microbiome. And I won't get into the full thing today, but there is the potential horizontal gene transfer to the soil microbiomes and then to bacteria. So what I like to say is spend some time in the dirt. I think this is really one of the most impactful things you can do. You don't necessarily have to jump in a mud puddle, but I think spending time in the dirt is really just so important. And this is called the farm effect. So again, people who lived on farms were found, their children were actually found to have less or like more protection because of their exposure to the soil, more protection when it comes to less incidence of allergies and asthma as they grew. So the human gut microbiome is also important for producing essential amino acids, B vitamins, vitamin K, and the soil microbiota around the root is responsible for producing hormones that help with plant growth and health and improve nutrient uptake by the plant too. Also resistance to drought and pathogens and sustainable plant growth. So the question often comes up, aren't all vegetables nutritious? So nutrients required for plant growth is kind of the first place to start. It's interesting to consider 95% of what a plant's made of comes from the air, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So they essentially bring in CO2, and then they use that carbon and bring it down through the roots and sequester it in the ground. And that carbon helps feed kind of the like fungal networks in the soil. And then they exchange with the plant nutrients that can be taken up through the roots. So what the plants are actually getting from the soil is more of the primary macronutrients. So the nitrogen, which can also come from the air, but primarily comes from the soil, phosphorus and potassium, and then the secondary macronutrients and the micronutrients. So it's hard to talk about soil health without talking about glyphosate, or Roundup is one of the more common names. Hopefully getting taken off the market soon. But it's a herbicide. It's been in use since 1974 in the US. There's over 1.6 billion kilograms of glyphosate that have been applied. And so the use of glyphosate rose about 15-fold since the use of, or kind of since genetically engineered glyphosate tolerant crops were introduced in 1996. 2/3 of the volume of glyphosate applied in the US was from 1974 to 2014. And that's been sprayed in just that 10-year period, and it continues. That was just when the statistic was from. So it is on 70% of all crops now, highly used in things like chickpeas, lentils, wheat. And even after 2 years, they're still finding up to 60% remaining in the soil. And that really depends on environmental conditions. Sunlight can help break it down. Microbes can help break it down, especially fungi. But studies are really being still done to determine what bacteria and fungi can be used to help remediate the soil after glyphosate use. So we know that it does have an impact on the microbiome in the soil as well as in humans. It also disrupts sulfate synthesis, transport, and delivery, and it binds minerals in the soil. So if those minerals are bound in the soil, they're not being taken up by the plants, and that binding interaction kind of stays. So it really kind of binds up what's there, makes future successions of crops less nutritious. Also disrupts nitrogen fixing bacteria, and then requiring basically the application of nitrogen-based fertilizers, which of course impact runoff and can lead to large like algae blooms and things in our lakes. Can also cause mitochondrial dysfunction and various other health effects. There's been an increased incidence of different cancers, as well as reproductive effects, immune, endocrine, and nervous system effects. So as far as minerals go, I like to kind of explain this almost like thinking about when a human is calcium deficient, how we take calcium essentially out of our bones to keep our blood levels consistent. Plants do something similar. So they have mobile nutrients and immobile nutrients. So those immobile ones aren't going to go anywhere. But if the plant is deficient in the mobile nutrients, they'll pull those nutrients out of their older leaves. And that's when you might see like the yellowing of a older leaf. They pull it out of their older leaves and take it up to their younger leaves. And this is a concept I wanted to talk about today, really when thinking about where we are with farming and plant health. When we're growing plants that don't have the nutrients they need, we in turn are not getting the nutrients and the minerals and the vitamins that we need. And the term for this is called hidden hunger. It's the presence of multiple micronutrient deficiencies, particularly iron, zinc, iodine, vitamin A, which occur without a deficit in energy intake. And it's really a result of consuming an energy-dense diet, but having nutrient-poor food. The deficiency of micronutrients in humans caused by consuming this nutrient-poor food can actually affect cofactors in metabolism, coenzymes, and enzymes, and really, really have a powerful effect, even though it's not something you necessarily see or notice. This just shows zinc deficiency in a plant. And I think it's so interesting when you start to compare symptoms in plants and symptoms in people, right? And so this plant may still produce fruit or, maybe still eaten, but it's deficient. And again, humans show zinc deficiency as well. Also, plants show magnesium deficiency, calcium deficiency. They show these things in their leaves. And it's definitely possible to remediate these by doing different additions to the soil, but they need to be caught and addressed. And again, those nutrients need to be put back into the soil. So again, here's magnesium deficiency in humans. So it's pretty well established now, at least since the 1940s, that yield increases produced by fertilization, irrigation, and other environmental means tend to decrease the concentration of minerals in plants. And I'll explain that a little further in a second. But the historical nutrient content data for fruits and vegetables shows a median decline of 5 to 40% or more for minerals, vitamins, and proteins. Magnesium content, as we were just talking about magnesium, of vegetables declined by up to 25% over the past 50 years. And as we know, magnesium is so essential for so many different bodily functions. So this is just showing from 1940 to 1991, the change we're seeing. And you'll just look at the right-hand column here to see kind of the changes. And most of them are, essentially minus 49% in sodium and 16% in potassium. You'll notice phosphorus is up. And again, that's because of use of synthetic fertilizers. And then there's the dilution effect. So the dilution effect is actually, in this case, shown by applying phosphorus, like a phosphorus-based fertilizer. And it's a little hard to see, but the white is no phosphorus fertilizer applied. And then the checkered is 22 parts per million. And then the solid is 44 parts per million. So essentially, the more you apply, you see phosphorus go up. But then when you look across at all the other elements, you see those go down. And again, that's the dilution effect. So when you're applying those fertilizers, you may be taking up more phosphorus, but you're taking up less of the other minerals. And here is showing meat and the mineral content in meat. Again, during the same time period, you'll see again that we're seeing a change for the negative as far as nutrient content goes. And this is phytoplankton. So phytoplankton are essentially similar to terrestrial plants, but they live in the ocean. They're a food source for small fish, which are consumed by the fish that then become high in omega-3s. So the phytoplankton is actually what's causing them to be high in omega-3s. Half of their body weight, or half of the body weight of phytoplankton is omega-3s. These are also known as microalgae. So when the fish consume the phytoplankton, that is what makes them high in omega-3s. This changes, so the diet of fish changes with their location, environmental changes, and kind of what sort of access they have to these plants. When you look at farm-raised fish, their omega-3 content, as well as the content of the other vitamins and minerals in their flesh, is really based on the farmer's choice of pellets. Farmers often feed young fish pellets made from plant and animal sources, and then towards the end of their life, or when they are almost full grown, they switch over to the more expensive pellets, which will have fish oil enriched pellets, or other fish kind of incorporated into them, again to influence that nutritional content. But when studies look at fish and their omega-3 content, it varies wildly. depending on where they are raised, if they're farmed, what they're fed, and again, what kind of species of plants they're eating. We see this in commercial, kind of conventional agriculture as well. So plants or cows, depending on the breed of cow, when they are grass fed, they contain between 2 and 5 times more omega-3s than grain fed animals. The average ratio of omega-6, which is more pro-inflammatory, to omega-3 in grass fed beef is 1.5 to 1. And in grain fed beef, this ratio goes all the way up to 7.6 to 1. So again, a more ideal ratio when you look at omega-3 to omega-6 in that 1.5 to 1 range with the grass-fed animals. Grass-fed beef has more antioxidants, vitamins, and minerals than grain-fed beef. It also contains carotenoids from beta-carotene found in plants, which are converted in the body to vitamin A. But again, this is from the pigments from the plants that the animals are eating. Grain-fed beef doesn't actually have any appreciable levels of carotenoids, which is simply from the fact that the grains they're eating do not contain carotenoids. And then grass-fed beef also has more antioxidants, vitamin E, glutathione, superoxide dismutase, and catalase than grain-fed beef. These antioxidants are important, especially if you're choosing to grill your meat, because the more antioxidants in the grass-fed meat actually have somewhat of a protective effect versus the grain-fed meat that doesn't have those antioxidants in there. Of course, low heat or wet cooking methods would be preferable. And then grass-fed beef also contains higher levels of zinc, iron, phosphorus, sodium, and potassium. So again, just different ways of raising the animals on pasture, having that biodiversity, being able to eat plants based on their dietary needs. There's an awesome book called Nourished, and he talks about kind of the different grazing patterns of animals and how wise they are in selecting plants based on their nutritional needs day to day, meal to meal, from hour to hour. And also if they're sick, how their dietary patterns change to support that. This is one of my favorite plants, and most people know it as a weed, but it's purslane. And purslane is amazing. We call it the salmon of the plant world because it's so high in omega-3s. It's in the form of alpha linoleic acid. So 100 grams of fresh purslane, which is considered one serving, contains about 300 to 400 milligrams of omega-3s, 12 milligrams of vitamin E, 26 milligrams of vitamin C, 1.9 milligrams of beta carotene, and 14.8 milligrams of glutathione. So it's a really nutritious food that's rich in omega-3s as well as antioxidants, and is considered a weed and probably found in your garden. So I just think it's really neat to consider the nutrients that are available all around us. These are microgreens. They're a really interesting source of nutrient-dense minerals and vitamins and phytonutrients, and they grow really quickly. One study looked at over 25 different varieties of microgreens, and they found that they had more vitamins and phytochemicals and minerals than their full-grown counterparts when you look at it on a gram for gram basis. Most of the leaves have essentially 4 to 6 times more nutrients than mature leaves of the same plant. There are a lot of variations though, of course, as we talked about the soil or the growing medium, based on how it's grown and what sort of soil it's grown in. I love microgreens because they are really easy to incorporate into about anything. So you can put them on tacos or put them on pizza. You can grow microgreens like basil or broccoli or kale. I like them even on oatmeal if you do like a savory oatmeal. But looking at kind of the nutrients in a micro cabbage, which is the red. So when you look at a Chinese cabbage like microgreen, this green line is the USDA standard. So that's a petite Chinese cabbage, and this is what the USDA says like the average nutrient value is. When you look at the micro Chinese cabbage, and this is our data from our lab, but again, you see it there. The petite cabbage is the blue. So again, the micro and the petite is just a little bit bigger, but you see that again, these are very nutrient dense. I like to talk about celery too. So celery, the stalks are certainly edible and we're very used to that. Also the root's edible, which is neat. So celery roots often used in like soups, but I really love to encourage eating whole plants. And I'll talk about that more in a little bit. But here's looking at essentially a celery, the red is celery that is just picked off the grocery store shelf versus really fresh celery that's just been cut in the petite form. And these are just a couple, like about a week apart. So the blue and then the yellow is a week later. And so based on the life stage of the plant, like where it's at, depends on kind of its nutrient uptake and also how recently it's been harvested, because we know, certainly the soils play a role in that, but we also know that the longer time from harvest does affect the nutrient density as well. This is, of course, kale and all the wonderful varieties of kale. One of the things I really like to encourage is trying out different varieties. Healthy plants really start with healthy soil, like I talked about, but we also talk about seed selection because that's really important. Even starting with something as simple as a heavier seed, like if you get a package of seeds and you look at the weight of the seeds in that package, the heavier seeds are actually going to grow healthier plants, which is pretty incredible. Also, when you look at varieties within even like something as simple as kale, but you look at the lacinato versus like a mezcal, you'll see different nutrient profiles based on the different varieties. This is watercress, something popular kind of growing in really clean streams, usually in the springtime, fun to go out and forage for. Watercress is #1 on the CDC's ranking of powerhouse fruits and vegetables. Here they basically looked at, I think it was like 43 different fruits and vegetables, and only looking at like vitamins and minerals. Basically, they did not account for phytonutrients, but they basically gave them a score and ranked them in order of essentially nutrient density. So watercress is #1 on that list. When you look at watercress, I think it's important to notice, again, this is just different growing times influence kind of the nutrient density. But I think it's really interesting to think about bitterness too and breeding as you look at different plants. So in order for like some of the plants to become more palatable, like kale or like watercress, the glucosinolates are kind of what gives it that spicy or like pungent taste. And oftentimes for palatability, some of those things are bred out in favor of like more sweeter or like more mild flavors. But again, we're kind of breeding the medicine out of our plants there. So I really encourage people to look for plants that have those stronger flavors and maybe are a little bit more spicy if you can tolerate that. So how to optimize nutrient density and absorption. So first, I always like to talk about eating the rainbow. And what I like to tell people is superfoods are literally all around us. You don't need to get like the most exotic thing you can flown from thousands of miles away to be able to eat superfoods. They are literally growing at the farm down the street, right? And so I think it's important to include a wide variety of colors in the diet because you're able to get hundreds of different phytochemicals from each food, but each food or each plant has its own unique mix. There's over 25,000 different phytochemicals out there. And it's really interesting when we consider that like the typical American diet, there's over 40,000 different species of like edible plants and animals in the world, and the typical American diet contains 12. So it is so important to think of that diversity and how can you include different color, different plants into the diet, because again, all of those different colors are so beneficial. And the phytochemicals really are what protect the plants from pests and stressors. It's like the plant's immune system. And when we consume that, again, it transfers that benefit essentially to us. I've also heard the phytochemicals referred to as botanical sunscreen because plants too need protection from the sun. And so they'll make darker pigments to help protect their leaves from sun. The phytochemicals are what give plants their color, smell, and flavor. So if you think of essential oils are even phytochemicals. And then phytochemicals are antioxidants, and they are beneficial to human health in a number of different ways. This is a cabbage with holes in it, which most gardeners probably cringe at, or if you're at a grocery store and you see like an imperfect vegetable, you may be like, oh, I want the one that doesn't have spots or whatever. But the interesting thing is insect pressure actually helps plants produce more phytochemicals because that's what triggers them to start amping up their immune system to fight off those predators. I like to talk about the innate wisdom of the whole when it comes to plants. It's really easy and to get kind of thinking back or going back into putting the P back in Farmacy with an F and making out like single nutrients into like the one thing that causes a benefit. And I think it's likely way more complex than that. I like this quote that it's now widely believed that the actions of antioxidant nutrients alone do not explain the observed health benefits of diets rich in fruits and vegetables, because taken alone, individual antioxidants studied in clinical trials do not appear to have consistent preventative effects. And I think that's really the power of consuming plant foods, because there's more going on there than we even realize. But there's so much wisdom. Even in the enzymes the plants contain themselves, they contain digestive enzymes packaged in their cells that when chewed help us to digest and absorb their nutrients. I also love experimenting with different colors of familiar vegetables. So one of the things here is, so these are all asparagus. On the left is white asparagus that's grown in the dark. It has no chlorophyll. But the taste and the texture is like buttery with notes of corn and sweet cabbage. It's so neat and just uniquely delicious. And the purple is rich in anthocyanins, which we know are really beneficial phytochemicals. And it's sweeter and milder than the green. But this can become really a sensory tasting experience, not only giving you that diversity of different phytochemicals and health benefits, but also bringing more interest to your meals. This is a loose leaf lettuce, and just kind of the variety and color, you'll see again, different phytochemicals, but the looser leaves, again, have more sun exposure. So they're gonna be higher in phytochemicals than those plants which have tightly wrapped heads. So they are using their botanical sunscreen here. You can also chop or tear leaves up to 24 hours ahead of time before you use them to actually increase their antioxidants. Because when you tear or chop lettuce, the plant actually thinks it's being attacked and it increases its production of phytochemicals. I also recommend not washing it after you tear it. So wash it first so that you're not washing off vitamins and minerals from the lettuce that has just been recently chopped. So next, again, is eating leaf to root. It reduces food waste, which we all know is a huge problem. Also provides more balanced nutrients. When you look at beets, for example, the leaves are beautiful and can be used as well as the roots. So again, this is our data, but this is on a purple turnip. The red is basically showing that the turnip like root, and the blue is showing the greens. So you'll see the greens actually have more nutrients than the roots. And again, here is a beet. So the red is the beet root. The blue is the beet tops. So by consuming the whole plant, you're reducing food waste and you're getting more nutrients. I love encouraging fermentation as well. Fermentation is a great technique. You can do it on your countertop. I have these same lids at home that are really easy, and you can do it kind of in a mason jar size versus having to do like a huge vat of something. But it's really great to support beneficial microorganisms in your microbiome. It also provides the prebiotic fiber from the vegetables, and those microorganisms start kind of digestion before you even eat it. So oftentimes people find those foods are a little bit easier to digest and the nutrients in them are more available. I kind of laugh about this because I have never been someone who peels carrots, but I really recommend not peeling carrots or really most vegetables, as long as you're getting them from kind of an organic source where you're not worried about contamination on the skin. But you can certainly wash your vegetables well, but leaving on the skin actually is more beneficial for phytonutrients because the skin, again, is what protects the vegetable from different pressures. And that's where most of the phytonutrients are, is in the skin. Also, even when it comes to potatoes, like the skin is a great source of fiber and vitamins and minerals as well. And then there's little carrot snacks. These are actually the cores of misshapen carrots. So like the least nutritious part of the carrot. When possible, even though it's less convenient, cutting up carrots into sticks instead uses the full carrot. And then again, you get the nutrients from the skin as well. When it comes to boiling vegetables, I recommend leaving them whole in order to minimize nutrient loss. Generally, I don't recommend boiling vegetables as like the primary way of cooking them unless you're going to consume the cooking water. So otherwise, if you kind of leave them in there boiling, eventually the boiling water becomes more nutritious than the vegetable itself. So I love stews and cooking with moisture. I think this is a really great way to cook and very, very nourishing and a great way to retain nutrients, but you just have to make sure you're consuming that liquid as well. Steaming is another great option. I always say don't overdo it. You don't want that like limp steam to death type of look, just where you're getting the brightness from the vegetables and they're still firm. You can also saute. I love using like a high polyphenol extra virgin olive oil as a finishing oil, but sauteing is another great way to retain the nutrients from vegetables. And then of course there's roasting on a sheet pan, which is probably the easiest and one of my favorite options. You can put all different vegetables together. And again, it helps retain the nutrients. So Bill Robertson said this, and I love it, that soil health is public health. And I think that's something that all of us sometimes need a reminder of, but I think it's just, it couldn't be more true. So thank you. I appreciate you guys listening. Happy Earth Day. I'm happy to take questions if you have questions for me. See, there's some in the chat maybe.
That was just so awesome, Amy. I just love hearing you speak, and just you bring in so many incredible pearls for us. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Gabby.
I can read you some of the questions from the Q&A.
Sure.
Rashida Ali says, what nutrients does soil get from decomposing plant material, the humus?
Yeah, so, it really depends on what is in the plant material that's decomposing. Usually, primarily, since plants are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, that would be the primary components that the soil would get. But of course, the other vitamins and minerals contained there are kind of what goes back into the soil as well.
Wonderful. And Lucia Roman has a couple questions. First, she asks, are there ways at the household level, both the consumer or home farmer, for the ability to test nutrients in produce grown in a home garden?
Oh, that's such a good question. So it's up and coming. I think his name is Dan Kittredge. He is developing a home nutrient testing monitor, which is so cool, and I want to buy one, but they're still in the testing phase. I think they're around $300 right now and not fully they're in a beta phase. So I don't know the accuracy, but I think it is something that's up and coming. He says his goal is getting it to where you could actually take it with you to the supermarket and do nutrient density testing while you're shopping, which I think would be amazing.
Very cool. Yeah, I just found, I'll put a link into the chat for everyone. And then with imported store-bought produce, what should we do with the wax cover? How do we get rid of it, or is it okay to eat it?
That's a great question. I don't know. I would say when possible, buying it without the wax cover is preferable. If you can go to a local farm or farmer, I think that's really preferable. Otherwise, I'm not positive. That's a great question, though.
Do you have any recipes for fermentation that you'd be willing to share, maybe with the membership or, afterwards? That'd be great.
I'll tell you my favorite cheater way to ferment. This is the easiest way. So if you buy a ferment at the store, and usually that's going to be in the refrigerator section, save that juice that's left over in the bottom. If you have pickles or sauerkraut or whatever, save that juice. And it just takes a couple tablespoons of it. But you basically put whatever you want in the jar, fill it kind of most of the way with water. If you have a good filtered water, maybe a teaspoon to a tablespoon of non-iodized salt, and then put a couple tablespoons of that liquid in there. And so you're essentially inoculating your ferment. And so it's a surefire way to do it right and get a good result. And that's the cheater way that I ferment, but I can write that down.
Love that. I love the cheater way. Yes, we're going to go try that. Okay, and one last question before we have to wrap up. And this is coming from Priyanka Heidelberger, is there any difference between cow dung from grass-fed cows versus grain-fed cows to use as manure in a veggie garden at home?
That's such a good question. And actually, I think this is a big deal. So depending on what the cows are fed, if they're fed a diet of grain that is treated with glyphosate, you may be getting that in the dung, essentially, especially if it's not composted or kind of going through a bacterial fermentation process ahead of time or getting a lot of fungal action. You could be getting some of that glyphosate in your garden, which then of course is not going to help your plants at all. So if possible, I think grass-fed animal manure would be preferable to be using in a garden.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amy, so much. This has just been so full of great information. It's I'm definitely going back to rewatch this one and share it widely. I just want to thank you all for coming, and remember that our videos are available on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/AIHM Global, or our Facebook page, which is also AIHM Global. The live stream is there. You can go back and watch it right now, and then we upload the YouTube within usually a couple days, if not sooner. I just want to remind people that we have launched our conference for the fall conference. We're so excited. We're going to be in person this year. There will be an online option for the main conference if you're not able to come to beautiful San Diego. But the People, Planet, Purpose conference this year's theme is Disruptive Innovation in the Future of Health. We have an incredible lineup of live speakers and online speakers. So please join us, join the community. We're really looking forward to being back in person, and we did just launch. So come to our website and check out the program. And I would love to invite you all to our next AIHM Wellness webinar, which we'll be hosting two amazing integrative doctors, Dr. Romy Mushtaq and Dr. Mahdia Saeed, who many of you know. They're going to be speaking on April 29th at the same time on holistic healthcare from an Islamic perspective. And we're so looking forward to this talk and to their valuable knowledge and wisdom. So again, Amy, thank you so much. We are together building a global community. Please think about joining our membership if you're not already a member and getting involved. We have incredible special interest groups starting and so many wonderful things happening at the Academy. We know and imagine that we together can change the world and make a unified global community and really transform the planet. So on this 52nd day of Earth Day celebration, go out and love your earth and have a beautiful day. And Amy, thank you for really just the perfect presentation today.
Thank you so much, Tabby. I really appreciate it.
Okay, everyone, go celebrate Mother Earth.